The wind tore across the ridge like a blade, and Elena Marsh could no longer feel her fingers. She had left the supply store an hour before the storm was supposed to hit, but the mountain never kept promises. Snow came down in sheets so thick she could barely see the trail markers nailed to the pines, and the temperature had dropped so fast that her breath froze on her scarf. She should have turned back at the first flurry. Instead, she pushed forward, boots sinking into drifts that reached her knees, telling herself the cabin was close, that she only had to survive a little longer. The wind screamed through the trees, and for a moment, she thought she heard something else beneath it, a low sound, pained, almost human. She stopped walking and listened. There it was again, a rough, broken breath coming from somewhere off the trail. Every instinct told her to keep moving, to get to shelter before the storm swallowed her whole, but something about that sound pulled at her, sharp and urgent, like a hand closing around her wrist. Elena stepped off the path. The snow was deeper here, unbroken, and she had to fight for every step. Branches clawed at her jacket. Her flashlight beam bounced wildly across white ground until it caught something dark, half buried near the base of a fallen tree. At first she thought it was a downed branch, or maybe a torn sack left by a hiker. Then it moved. She froze. It was a wolf, a massive one, larger than any she had ever heard of in these mountains, with fur the color of wet ash, and a body so still it looked already dead. Its side rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Blood, dark and half-frozen, stained the snow beneath its ribs. Elena's first thought was to run. She was a volunteer at the town's small animal clinic, not a wildlife handler, and every warning she had ever heard about wolves crowded into her mind at once. But the animal did not lift its head. It did not growl or bare its teeth. It simply lay there, trembling, its breath coming out in thin white clouds that grew fainter each time. She crouched a few feet away, heart hammering. "Hey," she whispered, though she knew it could not understand her. "Hey, easy, I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's eyes opened. They were a strange color, gold-rimmed with something almost silver, and for one impossible second, Elena felt as though the animal was studying her back, weighing her, deciding something. Then its eyes slid shut again, and its body went slack. She did not think. She acted. Elena tore off her coat, the only real protection she had against a storm that was trying to kill her too, and wrapped it around the wolf's shivering body. The fabric was warm from her own skin, and she pressed her palms against the animal's side, trying to share what little heat she had left. The wolf did not resist. It leaned into her hands as if it understood exactly what she was doing. "You're going to freeze out here," she said, mostly to steady her own nerves. "So am I, if I don't move." The old ranger cabin was not far, maybe 200 yards through the trees, abandoned since the Forest Service pulled its funding years ago, but still standing, still dry inside. Elena had used it once before during a hike gone wrong, and she prayed it was still there now. She managed to get her arms beneath the wolf's front legs, gritting her teeth against its weight. It was heavier than any dog she had ever lifted, heavier than seemed natural for its frame, but adrenaline gave her strength she did not know she had. She half carried, half dragged the animal through the snow, her coat wrapped tight around its body, her own thin sweater doing almost nothing against the cold biting into her skin. Every few steps she had to stop, lungs burning, legs shaking. Twice she nearly dropped him. Twice she looked into those pale gold eyes, barely open now, and found the will to keep going. "Don't you dare die on me," she muttered. "Not after I ruined a perfectly good coat for you." The cabin appeared through the trees like a mercy, its wooden walls gray with age, one window boarded, the door hanging slightly loose on its hinges. Elena kicked it open and dragged the wolf inside, collapsing onto the dusty floor beside him, chest heaving, snow melting in her hair. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she forced herself upright. There was no time to rest. She found the old wood stove in the corner, checked that the flue was clear, and used the dry kindling stacked beside it, along with a lighter she kept in her bag for emergencies just like this one. Her hands shook so badly, it took her 4 tries to get a spark to catch, but when the fire finally bloomed to life, she nearly wept with relief. She pulled the wolf closer to the heat, still wrapped in her coat, and began rubbing warmth back into his limbs, the way she would for a frostbitten patient at the clinic. His fur was matted with blood along one side, and when she peeled back the fabric to look, she found a wound, deep and jagged, unlike anything an animal or a fall could cause. It looked almost deliberate, almost like a weapon had made it. Elena pushed the thought aside. She had a first aid kit in her bag, meant for scrapes and blisters, not something like this. But she used what she had, cleaning the wound as gently as she could, pressing a folded cloth against it to slow the bleeding. The wolf flinched under her touch but did not pull away. "You're a fighter," she said softly, watching his chest rise and fall. "I can tell." Outside, the storm raged on, rattling the boarded window. But inside the cabin, warmth slowly filled the small space. Elena sat beside the wolf through the night, feeding the fire, checking his breathing, refusing to let herself sleep, even as exhaustion pulled at her eyes. There was something about him she could not explain, a presence that felt larger than his body, as if the room itself was aware of him. Near dawn, his breathing steadied. The trembling stopped. His wound, though still raw, had closed enough that the bleeding no longer worried her. Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. "There you go," she whispered. "You're going to make it." She did not know, could not have known, that the creature breathing quietly beside her was not simply a wolf that had wandered too far into a storm. She did not know that somewhere beyond the ridge, an entire pack was searching the mountains in silence, afraid to speak his name aloud, afraid of what it would mean if their king did not return. She did not know that the wound across his ribs had been made by another wolf, one who wanted the throne for himself and had left his king for dead in the snow. All Elena knew was that she had found something suffering, and she had done what her heart told her to do. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside blanketed in a silence so complete it felt sacred. Sunlight broke weakly through the clouds, catching on the frost that coated the windows. Elena stretched her stiff limbs and checked on the wolf again. He was sleeping now, real sleep, not the shallow unconsciousness of the night before. His fur had dried, and beneath her coat, still wrapped around him, his body radiated a warmth that felt almost feverish. She made her way outside to gather more wood, careful not to wander far, glancing back every few steps to make sure he had not stirred. The mountain looked different in daylight, softer somehow, the jagged edges of the storm smoothed into gentle white curves. Birds began to call again in the trees, tentative at first, then bolder. When she returned, arms full of kindling, she found the wolf awake. He was watching her, not with the wild, unfocused gaze of an animal in pain, but with something sharper, something aware. His eyes tracked her movement across the room with an intensity that made the hair on her arms rise, and for a strange, unsettling moment, Elena felt as though she were the one being studied, the one being judged. "Hey," she said carefully, setting the wood down slow. "You're awake." The wolf did not growl. He did not move to stand, likely still too weak, but he held her gaze without blinking, and something in his expression looked almost like gratitude, or maybe recognition. Elena told herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. Wolves did not look at people that way. They could not. She knelt a careful distance away and offered him water from her canteen, cupping her hand so he could drink from her palm. He hesitated only a moment before accepting it, his tongue rough and warm against her skin, and something about the simple act of trust eased the tightness in her chest. "I don't know what happened to you," she said quietly, "but you're safe here. For now." The wolf's ears flicked at the sound of her voice, and though she knew it was foolish, Elena could have sworn he understood every word. She spent the rest of the day tending the fire, rationing the small amount of food she had brought for her supply run, and checking his wound every few hours. By afternoon, his strength had returned enough that he could lift his head fully, watch her move around the cabin, track the door whenever the wind rattled it. He never tried to leave. He never showed a single sign of aggression. If anything, he seemed to relax more with each hour that passed, as though her presence itself was some kind of medicine. As evening approached, Elena made a decision. The storm had cleared, and the trail back to town would be difficult but passable. She could go for help, bring back proper supplies, maybe even convince someone from the clinic to look at the wound with equipment she did not have. But leaving him alone here, still weak, still recovering, felt wrong in a way she could not fully explain. "I'll stay one more night," she said, mostly to herself, "just to make sure you're strong enough." The wolf's tail moved once against the floor, slow and deliberate, and Elena laughed despite herself, surprised by how much the small gesture lifted her spirits. That night, As the fire crackled low and the cabin settled into quiet, Elena found herself talking to him, the way she might talk to an old friend, filling the silence with stories about her life, about the clinic where she volunteered, about the loneliness that had followed her up this mountain in the first place. The wolf listened, or seemed to, his golden eyes fixed on her with a patience that felt almost impossible for an animal to hold. She did not know that every word she spoke was being remembered. She did not know that the creature lying beside her carried a mind far older and far more complex than any wolf born of nature, a mind that belonged to a king, stripped of his crown, hunted by his own kind, saved by a stranger who asked for nothing in return. She only knew that when she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep near the fire, she felt, for the first time in a long while, that she was not entirely alone. Somewhere in the trees beyond the cabin, unseen and unheard, another set of eyes watched the thin trail of smoke rising into the morning sky. They did not approach, they did not yet know for certain what they had found, but word would travel fast through the pack that a king thought lost to the storm might still be breathing, hidden away in a forgotten cabin, guarded by a human woman who had no idea what she carried beneath her roof. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and smoke across the ridge, and somewhere far below, in the shadowed halls of a place Elena Marsh had never heard of and could not have imagined, a name began to spread among those who still remained loyal to their missing king. A name spoken in careful whispers, filled with a fragile, dangerous hope. Alive. He might still be alive. And for the first time since the coup that had torn his pack apart, those who loved him allowed themselves to believe that the storm had not taken everything from them after all. 3 days after the storm, Elena finally made her way back down the mountain, leaving the wolf resting in the cabin, with a promise that she would return. She had spent every spare hour of those 3 days at his side, watching his wound heal, at a pace that seemed almost too fast to be natural, though she pushed the thought away each time it surfaced. She had more pressing worries. Her small cottage at the edge of town needed checking. Her elderly neighbor Grace Whitfield would be wondering why she had vanished during the storm, and the clinic where she volunteered would need her hands again soon. She trudged through the melting snow toward home, her boots soaked through, her mind still lingering on golden eyes, and a heartbeat she had felt beneath her palms. She told herself it was nothing more than the natural bond that forms between a caretaker and a creature she had saved. She told herself that several times, actually, because some quiet part of her did not quite believe it. Grace was waiting on her porch when Elena reached the cottage, wrapped in a thick shawl, her sharp eyes narrowing with worry the moment she spotted her. "You look like you wrestled a bear," Grace said, stepping down to meet her. "Where in the world have you been? I nearly called the ranger station." "I got caught in the storm," Elena said, keeping her voice light. "Had to shelter in the old cabin up past the ridge trail." "Alone? For 3 days?" Elena hesitated only a fraction of a second. "I found an injured animal. I couldn't just leave it." Grace's eyebrows lifted, but she did not push further. Not yet. She simply guided Elena inside, put a kettle on the stove, and fussed over her the way she always did, muttering about frostbite and foolish mountain trails. Elena let herself be fussed over. It was easier than trying to explain the strange pull she felt toward the wolf still waiting in that cabin. Easier than admitting she planned to return the very next morning with proper food and medical supplies. That night, sleep did not come easily. Elena lay awake staring at her ceiling, replaying the moment those pale gold eyes had opened and fixed on her, sharp with an intelligence that unsettled her even now. She told herself, animals sometimes seemed smarter than they were, especially when a person was exhausted and half-frozen and desperate for company in the dark. It was a reasonable explanation. It simply did not feel like the whole truth. The next morning, she packed a bag with bandages, antiseptic borrowed quietly from the clinic supply closet, and enough food for several days. She told Grace she was checking on the injured animal again, and though her neighbor's expression remained skeptical, she let her go without argument. The walk back to the cabin felt shorter than before, driven by an eagerness Elena did not fully examine. When she pushed open the door, her breath caught. The wolf was standing. He was fully upright for the first time since she had found him, his massive frame filling the small cabin, in a way that made her suddenly aware of just how large he truly was. His wound had closed into a thin pink line, healed far beyond what 3 days should have allowed. He turned his head toward her the moment she entered, ears lifting, and something in his posture eased, as though her presence had answered a question he had been holding. "You're standing," Elena breathed, setting her bag down slowly. "That's incredible, honestly. I didn't expect you to heal this fast." The wolf took a careful step toward her, then another, until he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He lowered his head, pressing it gently against her side in a motion so deliberate it felt like a thank you, and Elena found herself laughing quietly, running her fingers through the thick fur at his neck. "You're welcome," she murmured, "though I still don't know your name." The wolf huffed, a sound almost like amusement, and Elena shook her head at herself for expecting an answer. She spent that day much like the others, cleaning what remained of the wound, feeding him the food she had brought, talking to fill the quiet. But something had shifted. The wolf seemed restless in a new way, pacing near the door as evening fell, glancing toward the tree line with an alertness that made Elena's skin prickle. "What is it?" she asked. "Do you hear something?" He did not answer, of course, but his body language spoke clearly enough. He was worried, or watching for something. Elena found herself standing beside him at the window, peering out into the darkening woods, though she saw nothing but shadows and snow. It was 3 days later, once the wolf's strength had fully returned and Elena had begun preparing to say goodbye, that everything changed. She had stepped outside to gather water from the small stream nearby, leaving the cabin door open behind her out of habit. When she returned, her arms full, she stopped so suddenly the water nearly spilled from her container. A man stood in the cabin doorway. He was tall, with dark hair damp, as though he had just come from bathing in the stream himself, and eyes the exact same pale gold as the wolf she had spent the past week caring for. He wore simple clothes, plain and slightly too large, as if borrowed or found rather than owned, and though his posture was calm, there was something coiled and watchful beneath it, like a man who had spent his entire life ready to defend himself. "Who are you?" Elena demanded, taking an instinctive step back, her heart pounding. "Where's the wolf that was staying here?" The man's expression flickered, something almost like amusement crossing his sharp features before settling into careful neutrality. "My name is Cale," he said, his voice low and even. "I heard there was a wolf here, injured. I wanted to see if he was all right." Elena's eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with the strange, inexplicable familiarity that tugged at her the moment he spoke. His voice carried an odd cadence, formal in a way that did not match his casual clothing, and his eyes, that impossible shade of gold, refused to look away from her the way most strangers' eyes would. "He was here a moment ago," she said carefully, glancing past him into the empty cabin. "I don't know where he went." "Perhaps he simply stepped out," Cale offered, though something in the way he said it felt deliberately vague. "Wolves do that. They come and go as they please." Elena studied him a long moment, water container still balanced in her arms, snow melting cold against her boots. There was no sign of the wolf anywhere in the cabin, no tracks leading away that she could see through the doorway, and yet this stranger had appeared out of nowhere, asking about the exact animal she had spent a week nursing back to health. "That's a strange coincidence," she said finally. "A man showing up right as the wolf disappears." Cale's lips curved, just slightly, into something that was not quite a smile. "The mountains are full of strange coincidences," he said. "I only came to make sure he was cared for. It seems he was, thanks to you." "You know about that?" "Word travels," Cale said simply, offering nothing more. Elena set her water down slowly, unease and curiosity tangled together in her chest. There was something about this man that felt dangerous, in a way she could not name, and yet she felt no urge to run, no instinct screaming at her to close the door and bar it against him. If anything, standing near him felt strangely like standing near the wolf had felt, safe, in a way that made no logical sense. "You should come in," she said finally, surprising herself. "It's freezing, and you're clearly not dressed for it." Something shifted in Cale's expression, brief and unguarded. Gratitude mixed with something deeper, he quickly smoothed away. "Thank you," he said quietly, stepping past her into the cabin's warmth. As he moved, Elena's gaze caught on a mark, just visible at the collar of his shirt, a thin, healed scar along his ribs, in the exact place the wolf's wound had been. Her breath caught, the pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to arrange themselves in her mind, though she was not yet ready to believe the picture they formed. "That scar," she said carefully, nodding toward it. "How did you get that?" Cale's eyes met hers, and for a long, charged moment, neither of them spoke. Then he looked away, toward the fire, his jaw tightening with something that looked almost like old pain. "A long story," he said quietly. "One I'm not ready to tell yet." Elena did not press further, though the questions burned in her chest. She busied herself instead with rebuilding the fire, stealing glances at the stranger who sat so carefully near the flames, who watched her every movement with the same intense, familiar patience the wolf always had. She told herself it was impossible. She told herself wolves did not become men, that magic belonged in stories told to children, not in cold mountain cabins where storms nearly killed the unwary. But some quiet, stubborn part of her had already begun to suspect the truth, and that night, as she lay awake listening to Cale's steady breathing across the small room, she found herself watching the shadows for golden eyes, waiting for a truth she was not entirely sure she was ready to face. Elena returned to town the next morning, though her thoughts stayed tangled in the mountain cabin, in a stranger with wolf eyes who refused to explain himself. She told herself she needed distance, needed time to think clearly, away from whatever strange pull kept drawing her back toward him. It did not work. By the second day, she found herself watching the tree line from her kitchen window, wondering if he would appear again. He did. Cale showed up at her cottage door on the third evening, dressed now in clothes that actually fit him, though still simple, still plain, in a way that suggested he owned very little. He stood at her threshold with an ease that suggested he had walked farther than most people would admit, his dark hair wind-blown, his expression carefully composed. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "for what you did for the wolf, and for me." Elena crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You still haven't told me what that means exactly." "I know," he admitted. "I'm not trying to be difficult. Some things are complicated to explain." "Try me," she said. "I helped save your life, or his life, or whoever's life it actually was. I think I've earned an explanation." Something in his expression softened, and for a moment, he looked less like the guarded stranger from the cabin, and more like a man simply tired of carrying secrets alone. "Can I come in?" he asked. "It's easier to talk somewhere warm." Elena studied him a long moment before stepping aside. Grace would scold her later for letting a strange man into her home after dark, but something about Cale made caution feel unnecessary, even as her rational mind insisted it should not. Inside, over tea she'd barely remembered making, Cale told her a partial truth, careful and measured. He said he came from a community deep in the mountains, one that lived apart from town, with old traditions and old rivalries. He said he had been attacked, left for dead by people who wanted something he possessed, and that the wolf she found was, in some way he refused to fully explain, connected to him. "That's not really an answer," Elena said, watching him over the rim of her cup. "No," he agreed, "but it's the truth, as much as I can share right now." She wanted to push harder, wanted to demand the full picture, but something in his eyes, tired and guarded and strangely vulnerable, made her soften instead. "All right," she said, "I won't push. But I don't like being lied to, even in pieces." "I'm not lying," Cale said quietly. "I'm just not ready to hand you everything at once. Some truths are dangerous to know too quickly." Over the following days, Cale became a fixture in Elena's life, in a way that surprised them both. He would appear at her door in the evenings, sometimes helping her chop wood or repair a fence post, with a strength that seemed effortless, sometimes simply sitting with her on the porch as the sun set, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. He asked about her life with genuine curiosity, about her work at the clinic, about the loneliness she rarely admitted to anyone, and Elena found herself opening up in ways she had not allowed herself in years. Grace noticed, of course. She always noticed everything. "That man has secrets," Grace said one afternoon, watching Cale help Elena carry supplies from her truck. "The kind that follow a person." "I know," Elena admitted. "But he's kind, careful. He doesn't feel dangerous, even though something about him clearly is." Grace's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Just be careful yourself, dear. Kindness can hide all sorts of things." Elena knew Grace meant well, but the warning did little to slow the growing warmth she felt whenever Cale was near. There was something steady about him, something that felt like coming home, even though she barely understood who he truly was. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread through the small town, whispered over counters and porches, about strange happenings in the mountains. A hiker claimed to have seen enormous wolf tracks near the ridge trail, larger than any recorded in the region's history. An old trapper spoke of hearing what sounded like a pack, howling in coordinated patterns, almost like communication rather than simple calls. Someone else mentioned a story their grandmother used to tell, about a hidden clan living deep in the peaks, ruled by a bloodline that could take the shape of wolves. Elena listened to these stories with growing unease, memories of golden eyes and impossible healing pressing at the edges of her mind. She did not share what she suspected with anyone, not even Grace, though she found herself watching Cale more closely each time they spoke, searching for confirmation of a truth she was not yet ready to voice aloud. One evening, as autumn cold began creeping into the mountain air, Elena worked up the courage to ask him directly. "The wolf," she said, as they sat together on her porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. "The one I found. Was that you?" Cale went very still, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Elena thought he might deflect again, might offer another careful half-truth designed to keep her at arm's length. Instead, he turned to face her fully, his expression open in a way she had not seen before. "Elena," he said quietly, "there are things about me you deserve to know, things I've been afraid to tell you, because once you know them, you can't unknow them, and your life becomes tangled up in dangers you never asked for." Her pulse quickened. "I already found you half dead in the snow and dragged you to shelter. I think I'm already tangled up, Cale." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Fair enough," he admitted. He drew a slow breath, as if gathering courage he rarely needed for anything else. "Yes," he said finally. "The wolf you saved was me." The words hung in the cold evening air between them, and though some part of Elena had already suspected the truth, hearing it spoken aloud sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How?" she breathed. "How is that even possible?" "It's a long story," Cale said, "and it's far from finished, but I promise you, Elena, every word I tell you from here forward will be true. You've already given me more than you know. You deserve honesty in return." Elena studied his face in the fading light, searching for any sign of deception, and finding none. Only a quiet, steady sincerity that settled something anxious in her chest, even as new questions bloomed to take its place. "Then start talking," she said softly. "I'm listening." And so, beneath a darkening mountain sky, Cale began to tell her the truth, piece by careful piece, about a world hidden just beyond the town's edge, about a crown he had lost, and about the danger that was still, even now, searching the mountains for him. Cale's story unfolded slowly that night, and over the nights that followed, each piece settling into Elena's mind like snow gathering into drifts, quiet but impossible to ignore. He told her of a hidden community deep within the mountain range, older than the town below it, built by families who had lived apart from ordinary society for generations, protecting a secret so old it had become simply a way of life. He told her that some among them carried the ability to change shape, wolf and human woven into the same blood, and that leadership within this community passed through strength and lineage combined, a position his family had held for as long as anyone could remember. "You make it sound like a kingdom," Elena said one evening, curled beneath a blanket on her porch while frost gathered along the railing. "In a way, it is," Cale admitted, "though we don't use words like that among ourselves. But yes, my family led our people, my father before me, and when he passed, that responsibility became mine." "So you're some kind of leader," Elena said slowly, working through the implications, "not just a person who happens to turn into a wolf." "Something like that," Cale said, his voice carrying a weight she had not heard from him before, tired and burdened in a way that made her chest ache with sympathy. "It's not a role I ever wanted, not entirely, but it's mine, and I've spent my whole life trying to carry it well." Elena studied him, this quiet, careful man who chopped her firewood and listened to her ramble about nothing important, and tried to reconcile that image with the picture forming in her mind, a leader of hidden mountain clans, hunted and left for dead by his own people. "Who did this to you?" she asked finally, nodding toward the faint scar still visible at his collar. "Who tried to kill you?" Cale's expression darkened, old anger flickering behind his golden eyes. "A man named Draven," he said. "He's wanted my position for years, believes he deserves it more than I do, and finally decided to stop waiting for it to be given to him. He attacked you. He and those loyal to him ambushed me during a routine patrol along the northern ridge," Cale said. "I was outnumbered, injured badly enough that I could not shift back easily, could not call for help. I ran as far as my body would carry me, and then the storm hit, and I thought that was the end of it." He paused, meeting her eyes with a quiet intensity. "Until you found me." Elena's throat tightened at the memory, the desperate cold, the fragile heartbeat beneath her hands. "I almost didn't stop," she admitted. "I almost kept walking." "But you didn't," Cale said softly. "You stopped. You gave up your own protection to keep me warm. You dragged me somewhere safe, when you had every reason to save yourself instead." He reached out, hesitant, and took her hand gently in his. "I will never forget that, Elena. Not as long as I live." The warmth of his hand against hers sent a flush through her chest that had nothing to do with the cold evening air, and Elena found herself leaning slightly toward him, before catching herself, pulling back with a small, embarrassed laugh. "So what happens now?" she asked, steering the conversation toward safer ground. "Does this Draven person know you're still alive?" Cale's jaw tightened. "Not yet, as far as I know. My people believe I may have survived, but they don't know where, or in what condition. It's safer that way, for now. The fewer who know my location, the fewer chances Draven has of finding me before I'm strong enough to face him properly." "And when you're strong enough," Elena said carefully, "what then?" "Then I take back what's mine," Cale said, quiet steel entering his voice. "Not for pride, not even entirely for myself. My people need stability, Elena. Draven's rule would be built on fear and violence. I cannot allow that. Not while I still draw breath." The conversation settled into a heavy silence, broken only by the wind moving through the pines beyond her porch. Elena watched Cale's profile in the dim light, the tension in his shoulders, the quiet resolve in his expression, and felt something shift inside her chest, a fierce, protective instinct she had not expected to feel for a man she had known only a matter of weeks. "I want to help," she said suddenly. Cale turned to her, surprise flickering across his features. "Elena, this isn't your fight. It's dangerous, more dangerous than you understand. I won't ask that of you." "You didn't ask," she pointed out. "I offered." She held his gaze steadily. "I already helped you once without knowing any of this. Now that I do know, you think I'm just going to walk away?" Something in Cale's expression cracked open, raw and unguarded, gratitude and worry tangled together so plainly that Elena's breath caught. "You barely know me," he said quietly. "I know enough," she replied. "I know you're kind, even when you don't have to be. I know you healed a wound on my porch railing, without me asking, just because you noticed it was loose. I know the way you look at this mountain, like it's something worth protecting, not just ruling." She paused, softer now. "That's enough for me to want you safe, Cale, whatever that takes." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the space between them charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Cale lifted her hand gently to his lips, a brief, warm press against her knuckles that sent heat racing up her arm. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin, "for everything." As the weeks passed, their bond deepened in quiet, unremarkable ways, shared meals and shared silences, small moments that mattered more than either of them fully admitted aloud. Elena learned the particular way Cale's expression softened when he thought she wasn't watching, the low, rare sound of his genuine laughter, the careful patience he showed whenever she asked about his world, answering every question honestly, even the difficult ones. But even as their connection grew, danger crept steadily closer, unseen and unheard, moving through the mountains with quiet purpose. Deep within the hidden community Cale had described, whispers had begun to circulate, careful and cautious at first, then bolder as evidence mounted. A scout loyal to Draven had spotted smoke rising from an old ranger cabin days after the storm, smoke that continued for far longer than any ordinary traveler would need. Another had noticed strange tracks near the edge of town, tracks that shifted between wolf and human prints in a pattern only their kind would recognize. Draven listened to these reports with growing suspicion, his patience thinning with each passing day. He had believed the storm finished what his ambush began, believed the mountain itself had erased the threat to his claim. The possibility that Cale had survived, that he was recovering somewhere close, hidden by a human woman who knew nothing of the danger she harbored, sent a cold fury through him that he did not bother to hide from those loyal to him. "Find him," Draven ordered his trackers, his voice sharp enough to silence the room. "And find whoever has been hiding him. I don't care what it takes." Far below, in the quiet warmth of Elena's cottage, neither she nor Cale yet knew how close that danger had crept, how quickly the fragile peace they had built together was about to be tested by forces neither of them could fully control. Winter settled fully over the mountain town by the time Elena noticed the first real changes in Cale's behavior. He had grown stronger over the past weeks, his movements steadier, the shadows beneath his eyes fading as his body healed completely. But alongside that strength came a new watchfulness, a habit of pausing mid-conversation to glance toward the tree line, of standing near windows with his shoulders tense, listening for something Elena could not hear. "You're doing it again," she said one evening, watching him from across her small kitchen as he stood near the door, gaze fixed on the darkening woods beyond her fence. Cale turned, offering a faint, apologetic smile. "Old habits," he said. "It's hard to stop watching for danger once you've learned to expect it." "Is something wrong?" she asked, setting down the mug she had been drying. "More than usual, I mean." He hesitated, and that hesitation alone told her the answer before he spoke. "I think word may be spreading," he admitted finally, "about my survival. I've felt eyes on me the past few days, out in the trees, nothing close enough to confirm, but enough to make me cautious." Elena's stomach tightened. "Draven's people?" "Possibly," Cale said, "or simply scouts curious about the smoke rising from an abandoned cabin for weeks on end. Either way, I don't like it." "What does that mean for us?" Elena asked, though she already dreaded the answer. Cale crossed the small kitchen, taking her hands gently in his. "It means I need to be more careful about how often I come here," he said. "For your safety as much as mine. If Draven learns you've been helping me, he won't hesitate to use you against me." The thought sent a cold shiver through Elena's chest. Fear tangled uncomfortably with stubborn defiance. "I'm not afraid of him," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "You should be," Cale said quietly, his expression grave. "Draven is not a man who honors boundaries, human or otherwise. I won't risk you becoming a target because of choices I made to protect myself." "Those weren't your choices," Elena reminded him gently. "They were mine. I chose to help you. I choose to keep helping you." Cale's jaw tightened, torn between gratitude and worry, but before he could respond, a sound outside made them both freeze, a low rustle in the underbrush beyond Elena's fence, too deliberate to be the wind. Cale moved instantly, positioning himself between Elena and the door, his entire posture shifting into something coiled and alert that she had never witnessed from him before. "Stay behind me," he murmured, voice low and steady. "Cale, please," he said, not unkindly, but firm enough that she obeyed, heart pounding as she watched him move toward the window, scanning the darkness beyond with narrowed eyes. Long, tense moments passed in silence. Then, gradually, Cale's shoulders eased, though not entirely. "A deer," he said finally, exhaling slowly. "Just a deer, moving through the brush." Relief flooded through Elena, though the fear lingered, coiled tight in her chest. "That can't keep happening," she said quietly. "You can't keep living like this, watching every shadow." "No," Cale agreed, "I can't. Which is why I think it's time I return to my people, at least for a while. I need to reassure them I'm alive, gather what allies remain loyal to me, and prepare properly for whatever comes next with Draven." The idea of Cale leaving, even temporarily, sent an unexpected ache through Elena's chest, sharper than she wanted to admit. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know," Cale admitted. "Days, perhaps. Longer, if things are more complicated than I hope." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair gently from her face, his expression soft despite the tension still lingering in his shoulders. "I don't want to leave you, Elena, believe me, but staying here, putting you at greater risk with every visit, isn't fair to you either." Elena swallowed hard, torn between the fear of losing him to whatever danger awaited in the mountains, and the understanding that he was right, that his continued presence in her small cottage placed her squarely in a conflict she barely understood. "Promise me you'll come back," she said quietly. I promise, Cale said, voice thick with sincerity. Nothing could keep me from returning to you, Elena. Not Draven. Not anything. He left before dawn the next morning, disappearing into the tree line with a final, lingering glance back toward her cottage that stayed with Elena long after he vanished from sight. The days that followed passed slowly, filled with the ordinary rhythms of clinic work and quiet evenings that now felt hollow without his presence. Grace noticed the change in her almost immediately. You're distracted, she observed one afternoon, watching Elena stare blankly at a stack of paperwork she had read 3 times, without absorbing a single word. Is this about that man? His name is Cale, Elena said, though she did not deny the observation. Where did he go? Home, Elena said simply, unable to explain further, without revealing truths that were not hers alone to share. He had things to take care of. Grace studied her a long moment, concern softening her usually sharp expression. You care for him, she said. It was not a question. Elena did not answer immediately, staring down at the papers in front of her, memories of golden eyes and gentle hands rising unbidden in her mind. More than I expected to, she admitted quietly. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains, Cale's return to his people unfolded with careful precision. He avoided the main paths, moving instead through hidden trails known only to those born within the community, until he reached the edge of the territory his family had protected for generations. There, hidden lookouts spotted him first, disbelief flooding their expressions, before erupting into hushed, urgent whispers that spread through the settlement like wildfire. Word reached his closest allies within minutes, chief among them a broad-shouldered man named Nathan, who had served as Cale's most trusted advisor since childhood. Nathan met him at the settlement's edge, relief and fury warring across his weathered features. You're alive, Nathan breathed, gripping Cale's shoulder, as though needing physical proof of the fact. We searched for weeks. Draven claimed you'd fled in cowardice, that you abandoned your responsibilities. Draven lies as easily as he breathes, Cale said grimly. He ambushed me on the northern ridge. I barely survived. Nathan's expression darkened. Where have you been all this time? Cale hesitated only briefly before answering honestly. A human woman found me during the storm, half dead in the snow. She nursed me back to health, sheltered me, asked nothing in return. Nathan's eyebrows rose sharply. A human woman knows what you are? She does now, Cale admitted. And she's trustworthy, Nathan. More trustworthy than half the council who claimed loyalty to me before Draven's coup. Nathan studied him carefully, weighing the implications, before nodding slowly. Then we'll discuss it later. For now, we need to gather those still loyal to you and plan our next steps carefully. Draven has grown bold in your absence. His influence over the council has strengthened. Cale's expression hardened with quiet resolve. Then it's time I reminded everyone exactly who they swore loyalty to. As night fell over the hidden settlement, word of the true Alpha's survival spread through careful, guarded whispers, rekindling hope among those who had mourned him, and stirring dangerous unease among those who had already begun aligning themselves with Draven's rising power. The fragile peace that had settled over the community since the coup was about to shatter, and both sides understood, with growing certainty, that conflict was no longer a distant possibility, but an approaching inevitability. Far below, in her quiet cottage at the mountain's edge, Elena had no way of knowing how quickly the world she had unknowingly stepped into was beginning to shift, or how soon that shifting world would come crashing directly into her own. Cale remained among his people for 8 days, and each one felt longer than the last to Elena, who found herself checking the tree line from her kitchen window far more often than she cared to admit. She kept busy with clinic work, with Grace's constant company, with anything that might distract her from the worry gnawing steadily at her chest, but nothing quite managed to fill the quiet space Cale had left behind. On the 9th day, a soft knock sounded at her door just after sunset. Elena opened it to find Cale standing on her porch, travel-worn but whole, his golden eyes finding hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. Relief crashed through her so suddenly she barely registered moving, before her arms were around him, holding tight, his own arms wrapping around her a heartbeat later. You came back, she murmured into his shoulder. I told you I would, Cale said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion she had not expected. I meant it. He stepped inside, once she released him, and Elena noticed immediately the changes in him. a new weariness around his eyes, tension held tightly in his shoulders that had not been there before. "What happened?" she asked, guiding him toward a chair near the fire. "Tell me everything." Cale sank into the chair, rubbing a tired hand across his face before speaking. "The council is divided," he said. "Word of my survival has spread, and many remain loyal, grateful even, relieved to see me alive. But Draven has grown more entrenched than I anticipated. He's built alliances during my absence, promised positions of power to those willing to support his claim. Can you take back your position?" Elena asked, settling into the chair beside him. "I believe so," Cale said, though uncertainty colored his voice. "But it won't be simple. Draven won't relinquish his claim without conflict. He spent too long anticipating this opportunity to let it slip away peacefully." Elena's stomach twisted with worry. "So there will be fighting." "Likely," Cale admitted grimly. "I've spent the past days rallying those still loyal to me, preparing what defenses we can. But Draven is cunning, and I fear he won't wait patiently for a fair confrontation. He'll strike wherever he sees weakness." "Meaning?" Elena pressed, though dread already curled tight in her chest. Cale met her eyes, his expression heavy with reluctant honesty. "Meaning you may already be a target, Elena. If Draven learns of your role in my survival, he may see you as leverage, a way to weaken my resolve, or draw me into a trap." Fear settled cold and sharp in Elena's chest, but beneath it, stubborn determination rose just as quickly. "Then we prepare for that too," she said firmly. "I'm not running from this, Cale. Not after everything." Cale reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady despite the worry etched across his features. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said quietly, fiercely. "Whatever comes, I promise you that." Over the following days, Cale divided his time carefully between the hidden settlement and Elena's cottage, growing increasingly cautious with each visit, always scanning the surrounding woods before approaching her door, always alert to sounds and shadows that might signal danger. Elena watched him grow more guarded, more tightly wound, and found herself equally vigilant, though she tried not to let her fear show, unwilling to add to the weight already pressing down on him. It was on a cold evening, nearly 2 weeks later, as Elena walked home from the clinic along the quiet edge of town, that the danger Cale had warned her about finally showed itself. She noticed the man first from a distance, standing near the tree line at the edge of the road, watching her with an unsettling stillness that immediately set her nerves on edge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark, calculating eyes that tracked her movement with predatory focus. Something about his posture, the careful way he held himself, reminded her uncomfortably of Cale, though none of the warmth she associated with him. Elena quickened her pace, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that this man was not simply a curious stranger. "Elena Marsh," the man called out, his voice smooth and cold, stopping her in her tracks despite every urge to keep walking. "I've heard quite a bit about you." She turned slowly, forcing her expression into careful neutrality, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I don't know you," she said. "No," the man agreed, stepping closer with unhurried confidence. "But I know you. You're the woman who's been hiding my king." His lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "My name is Draven. Perhaps Cale has mentioned me." Elena's blood ran cold, every muscle tensing with the sudden, sharp awareness of danger. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, though her voice betrayed her with a slight tremor. "There's no need to pretend," Draven said, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps. "I simply wanted to see for myself the woman who's managed to distract my rival so thoroughly from his responsibilities." His eyes swept over her, cold and assessing. "I must admit, I expected someone more remarkable." "Stay away from me," Elena warned, backing away, though her voice remained steadier than she felt. Draven's smile widened, sharp and humorless. "I have no intention of harming you today," he said, though the threat beneath his words was unmistakable. "Consider this simply a warning. Tell Cale that his time is running short. Tell him the longer he hides among humans, playing at ordinary life, the weaker his claim to leadership becomes." He paused, eyes glinting with cold amusement. "And tell him that I know exactly where to find you, should the need arise." Before Elena could respond, Draven turned and disappeared into the trees with unsettling speed, leaving her standing alone on the empty road, heart pounding, breath coming in shallow, frightened gasps. She ran the rest of the way home, locking her door behind her the moment she stepped inside, hands trembling as she reached for her phone to call Cale, though she had no way to reach him beyond waiting for his next visit. The evening stretched long and terrifying, every creak of the house sending fresh spikes of fear through her chest, until finally, well past midnight, a soft knock sounded at her door. She nearly collapsed with relief when she opened it to find Cale standing there, immediately sensing something was wrong from her expression alone. "Elena," he said urgently, stepping inside and gripping her shoulders gently. "What happened?" "Draven," she said, voice shaking despite her efforts to remain calm. "He found me. He knows about us, Cale. He threatened me." Cale's expression darkened into something fierce and dangerous, a fury Elena had never witnessed from him before. "He approached you directly?" he demanded, voice tight with barely controlled anger. "He said it was a warning," Elena said. "That your time was running short, that he knows exactly where to find me." Cale pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, his body tense with restrained rage. "I should have protected you better," he murmured against her hair. "I never should have let this danger touch you." "It's not your fault," Elena said firmly, pulling back to meet his eyes. "But Cale, this can't continue. He's not going to stop, is he?" "No," Cale admitted grimly. "He won't, which means the time for careful patience has ended." His jaw hardened with fierce resolve. "I need to reclaim my position, Elena, and soon, before Draven decides threats aren't enough and escalates further." Elena nodded slowly, fear and determination tangled together in her chest. "Then let's stop waiting," she said. "Whatever needs to happen, let's make it happen." Cale studied her for a long moment, something fierce and protective and deeply grateful flickering behind his golden eyes. "Together then," he said quietly. "Together," Elena agreed, and outside, the mountain wind howled through the darkened trees, carrying with it the unmistakable sense that the fragile peace they had built together was rapidly drawing to its end. After Draven's threat, Cale refused to leave Elena's side unguarded again. He arranged for one of his most trusted allies, a quiet, watchful woman named Ivy, to remain near the cottage during the hours he could not be there himself, though Elena noticed Ivy always seemed to melt into the shadows just beyond the tree line, present but unobtrusive, a silent guardian rather than a visible presence. "You didn't have to do this," Elena said one morning, watching Ivy's distant figure through the kitchen window as she prepared breakfast. "I did," Cale said simply, setting cups on the table between them. "I won't risk another moment of vulnerability, not after what Draven did." Elena appreciated the gesture, though the constant awareness of danger wore at her nerves in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself glancing over her shoulder more often, startling at unexpected sounds, sleeping lighter than she had in years. Still, she refused to let fear control her entirely, continuing her work at the clinic, continuing her quiet evenings with Cale, determined not to let Draven's shadow eclipse the fragile happiness they had built together. It was nearly 3 weeks after the confrontation on the road that everything came to a head. Elena had just finished a long shift at the clinic, exhaustion settling heavy in her limbs as she walked the familiar path home beneath a sky already darkening toward evening. She noticed immediately that something felt wrong, the usual birdsong absent, the air unnaturally still, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Then she saw Ivy. The woman was crouched near the tree line, tense and alert, her attention fixed on something Elena couldn't yet see. "Get inside," Ivy said sharply the moment she noticed Elena's approach. "Now." "What's happening?" Elena asked, fear spiking through her chest. "Draven's people," Ivy said grimly. "Several of them, moving through the woods toward your cottage. I need you inside, doors locked, immediately." Elena didn't argue, sprinting the remaining distance to her cottage and locking the door behind her with trembling hands, heart pounding as she peered through the window into the gathering darkness. She could see nothing beyond the tree line, but the tension radiating from Ivy's posture told her everything she needed to know. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity before Elena spotted movement, dark shapes emerging from the trees, too large and too deliberate to be ordinary wolves. Ivy shifted in a fluid, startling motion, human form dissolving into that of a sleek gray wolf, placing herself protectively between the approaching threat and Elena's cottage. Elena's breath caught as she watched 3 more shapes emerge from the shadows, wolves larger than any natural creature, moving with coordinated, predatory purpose, directly toward her home. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to remain steady, remembering Cale's instructions to stay hidden, to trust that help would come. A sudden, piercing howl split the air, distant but unmistakable, and Elena recognized it instantly as Cale's voice, carrying urgency and fury in equal measure. Moments later, he burst from the tree line in wolf form, a blur of ash-colored fur moving with terrifying speed toward the confrontation unfolding outside her cottage. Elena pressed herself against the window, watching in horrified fascination as Cale intercepted the largest of the approaching wolves, the two colliding with a force that shook the ground beneath them. Ivy moved to engage a second attacker, her smaller frame deceptively swift and precise, while the remaining wolves circled cautiously, searching for an opening. The confrontation unfolded in a blur of motion and sound, snarls and impacts that made Elena's stomach twist with terror for Cale's safety. She wanted desperately to help, but knew instinctively that stepping outside would only create a vulnerability Cale would be forced to protect, dividing his attention when he needed it, fully focused on the threat before him. Instead, she made a different choice. Grabbing her phone, she dialed the only number she knew might bring help fast enough, the local ranger station, reporting aggressive wildlife near her property, with enough urgency in her voice that she knew they would respond quickly. It wasn't much, but the sound of an approaching vehicle, even one unaware of the true nature of the conflict, might be enough to scatter Draven's remaining forces before the situation grew worse. Outside, the battle had reached a critical point. Cale had driven off one attacker, but at a cost, blood matting his fur along one shoulder where sharp teeth had found their mark. Ivy fought valiantly against her own opponent, but exhaustion was beginning to show in her movements, her earlier speed slowing under sustained pressure. Elena watched, helpless and terrified, as a third wolf broke away from the chaos and turned directly toward her cottage, clearly recognizing her as the true target of Draven's aggression. Her heart lurched with panic as the creature approached the door, and without fully thinking through the danger, she grabbed the heaviest object within reach, an old cast-iron pan from her kitchen counter, and positioned herself defensively. The wolf's weight slammed against the door once, the wood groaning under the impact, and Elena's breath caught in terrified anticipation of a second strike. But before it came, a furious snarl erupted from just beyond the door, followed by the sound of impact and a pained yelp that was decidedly not Cale's voice. Distant headlights swept across the tree line moments later, the ranger truck's engine growing louder as it approached, and the remaining attackers scattered swiftly into the darkness, unwilling to risk exposure to human witnesses. Elena rushed to the window in time to see Cale, still in wolf form but breathing hard, standing protectively at her doorstep, Ivy limping toward him from where the confrontation had unfolded. The ranger's truck rolled to a stop nearby, and Elena hurried outside despite her racing heart, waving the vehicle away with a hastily improvised excuse about a dog scare that seemed to satisfy the tired ranger enough to send him on his way without further investigation. Once the truck's taillights disappeared down the road, Elena turned back toward Cale, finding him already shifting back into human form, exhaustion and pain etched across his features as he stumbled slightly, catching himself against her porch railing. "Cale!" She rushed to his side, supporting his weight as he leaned heavily against her, blood still seeping from the wound along his shoulder. "I'm all right," he said, though his voice was strained. "Are you hurt? Did they reach you?" "I'm fine," Elena assured him quickly. "You're the one bleeding." Ivy approached slowly, favoring one leg, her expression grim despite the relief evident in her eyes. "They retreated," she reported. "But this won't be the last attempt, not now that Draven knows we're actively protecting her." Cale nodded grimly, accepting Elena's help as she guided him inside, immediately reaching for her first aid supplies, with hands that had grown far too familiar with tending his wounds over these past months. "This has to end," he said, gritting his teeth, as she cleaned the gash along his shoulder. "Draven grows bolder with each passing week. If we don't act soon, he'll escalate further. And next time, we may not be as fortunate." "What do you need to do?" Elena asked, though she already dreaded the answer forming in her mind. Cale met her eyes, resolve hardening his expression, despite the pain still evident in his features. "I need to challenge him directly," he said quietly. "End this uncertainty once and for all, before anyone else I care about gets hurt because of it." Elena's chest tightened with fear at the implication, but she understood, with growing certainty. that there was no other path forward, not anymore. The confrontation that had been building since the moment she found Cale half frozen in the snow was finally, inevitably, drawing near, and there would be no avoiding it any longer. In the days following the attack on Elena's cottage, Cale moved with a new sense of urgency, spending long hours away at the hidden settlement, rallying his allies and formalizing his challenge against Draven's claim. Elena remained under Ivy's watchful protection whenever Cale could not be present, though the constant tension of waiting for the next threat wore steadily at her nerves. Nathan arrived at the cottage one evening alongside Cale, his expression grave as he laid out the situation with careful precision. "The council has agreed to recognize a formal challenge," he explained, pacing slightly as he spoke. "Draven cannot refuse without losing what little legitimacy he still holds among the undecided members. The confrontation will happen in 3 days' time, at the old gathering grounds near the northern ridge." "What does a formal challenge actually involve?" Elena asked, dread coiling tight in her stomach. Cale's expression remained carefully neutral, though Elena had grown skilled enough at reading him to see the tension hidden beneath his composure. "It's a contest of strength and skill," he said. "Fought until one combatant yields or can no longer continue. The council oversees it to ensure fairness, and the outcome determines leadership without question, respected by all who witness it." "And if you lose?" Elena asked quietly, though she already feared the answer. Cale did not answer immediately, and Nathan's grim silence told her enough. "I won't lose," Cale said finally, his voice steady, despite the weight of everything riding on his words. "I can't afford to." The following days passed in a blur of tense preparation. Cale trained relentlessly at the settlement, testing his healed strength against Nathan and other loyal allies, sharpening skills that had grown rusty during his months of recovery. Elena rarely saw him during this time, though he returned each evening exhausted but resolute, always taking a few precious moments to hold her close before sleep finally claimed him. "I'm frightened," Elena admitted one night, curled against his side, as firelight flickered across her small living room. "I know you're strong, Cale, but Draven fights dirty. He proved that already." Cale pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his arms tightening protectively around her. "I know," he murmured, "but I have something Draven doesn't." "What's that?" "A reason worth fighting for beyond ambition," Cale said quietly, meeting her eyes with a warmth that eased some of the fear coiled in her chest. "You've given me that, Elena, more than you realize." The morning of the confrontation arrived cold and clear, frost coating the ground as Elena accompanied Cale toward the hidden settlement for the first time, escorted carefully by Ivy and Nathan, along paths designed to keep her presence discreet from those still uncertain of Cale's leadership. The gathering grounds, when they finally reached them, spread wide and open beneath the towering peaks, already filling with members of the hidden community, tension and anticipation thick in the cold morning air. Draven stood waiting at the center of the grounds, flanked by several loyal supporters, his expression carrying an arrogant confidence that made Elena's stomach twist with fury and fear in equal measure. When his gaze found her among the gathered crowd, his lips curved into a cold, knowing smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "Careful," Ivy murmured beside her. "Don't let him unsettle you. That's exactly what he wants." Elena forced her expression into careful neutrality, refusing to give Draven the satisfaction of visible fear, though her heart pounded fiercely, as Cale stepped forward to formally announce his challenge before the assembled council. The elder overseeing the proceedings, an aged woman named Ruth with sharp, discerning eyes, addressed the crowd with practiced authority. "Cale, rightful heir to the leadership of this community, has returned to challenge Draven's claim," she announced. "This contest will determine, once and for all, who leads our people forward. Let it be fought with honor, and let its outcome be respected by all who witness it." Draven stepped forward, shedding his outer garments with deliberate confidence, and within moments, his form rippled and shifted, expanding into the massive shape of a dark-furred wolf, larger even than Cale, muscles rippling with barely restrained aggression. Cale followed suit, his own transformation swift and controlled, ash-colored fur settling over powerful limbs as he faced his rival across the frost-covered ground. Elena watched, heart in her throat, as the two wolves circled each other cautiously, tension coiling visibly through their powerful frames. The crowd fell silent, anticipation thick enough to taste, until finally, without warning, Draven lunged. The confrontation that followed was fierce and brutal, the two wolves clashing repeatedly in bursts of raw power, snarls and impacts echoing across the open grounds. Elena forced herself to watch despite the fear twisting through her chest, unwilling to look away from the man she had come to love, as he fought for everything he held dear. Draven fought with reckless aggression, relying on brute strength and calculated cruelty, aiming for weaknesses with cold precision. Cale, in contrast, fought with controlled discipline, conserving his strength, watching patiently for openings rather than expending himself in wild, unfocused attacks. The battle stretched long, both combatants bearing fresh wounds, exhaustion beginning to show in their movements. At one particularly brutal exchange, Draven managed to pin Cale momentarily, jaws snapping dangerously close to his throat, and Elena's heart nearly stopped, a horrified gasp escaping her before she could stop it. Draven's head turned briefly at the sound, gaze flicking toward her with cold amusement, and that single moment of distraction proved costly. Cale twisted free of the pin with sudden explosive strength, using Draven's shifted attention against him, driving his rival back with a series of swift, precise strikes that left the larger wolf staggering. The crowd's tension shifted palpably, murmurs of surprise and renewed hope rippling through the gathered onlookers as Cale pressed his advantage, driving Draven steadily backward with controlled, relentless pressure. Draven fought back desperately, but exhaustion and mounting injuries had begun to erode his earlier confidence, his movements growing increasingly desperate and disorganized. Finally, with a decisive, powerful strike, Cale forced Draven to the ground, positioning himself with clear, undeniable dominance over his fallen rival. Draven struggled briefly, then, recognizing the futility of continued resistance, went still beneath him, a clear and unmistakable sign of surrender before the entire assembled community. The elder overseeing the proceedings stepped forward, voice carrying clearly across the silent grounds. "The challenge is decided," Ruth declared. "Cale's claim to leadership stands rightfully restored, witnessed and respected by all present." A wave of relief and celebration rippled through the crowd, though Elena barely registered it, her attention fixed entirely on Cale as he stepped back from his fallen rival, breathing hard, exhaustion and triumph mingling across his features as he shifted back into human form. Elena rushed forward the moment propriety allowed, wrapping her arms around him despite the blood and exhaustion evident across his frame. "You did it," she breathed against his shoulder. "It's over." Cale held her close, relief evident in the way his body finally relaxed against hers. "It's over," he agreed quietly. "Thanks to you, Elena. All of it, thanks to you." Behind them, Draven was escorted away by several council members, his expression carrying bitter defeat rather than any remaining defiance, while the gathered crowd began settling into quiet, relieved conversation. The tension that had gripped the community for months, finally beginning to ease. Elena pulled back slightly, studying Cale's tired but triumphant expression, and felt a fierce, overwhelming surge of pride and love swell within her chest. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, this moment, standing together beneath the clearing mountain sky, felt like the beginning of something new and hopeful, a future finally free from the shadow that had loomed over them since the very night she found him half frozen in the snow. The days following the challenge brought a fragile sense of peace to the hidden settlement, though Elena quickly learned that peace rarely arrived without complications. Cale's leadership had been formally restored, but rebuilding trust within a community, fractured by months of division, proved slower and more delicate than any single victory could accomplish. He spent long hours in council meetings, mending alliances strained by Draven's influence, reassuring those who had wavered during his absence. Elena remained close throughout this process, though she understood, without needing to be told, that her presence within the hidden community required careful navigation. Not everyone welcomed a human woman standing so near their newly restored leader, and she caught more than a few uncertain glances, murmured conversations that quieted whenever she passed. "They'll come around," Ivy assured her one afternoon, as they walked together along the settlement's edge. "Give them time. Cale's happiness matters to them, even if they're slow to admit it." "I hope you're right," Elena said, though doubt lingered in her chest. That doubt sharpened into real fear 3 days later, when word reached the settlement that Draven had escaped his confinement, slipping past the guards assigned to watch him under cover of night. Nathan delivered the news to Cale and Elena with grim urgency, his expression tight with barely contained frustration. "He can't have gone far," Nathan said, "but he's desperate now, humiliated before the entire council. There's no telling what he might attempt." Cale's expression darkened with immediate concern, his gaze flicking instinctively toward Elena. "He'll go after her," he said quietly. "It's the only card he has left to play." "You don't know that," Elena said, though her voice wavered slightly. "I know Draven," Cale said grimly. "He's lost everything else. Hurting you would be his last, desperate attempt to wound me in return." Cale immediately doubled the guard around Elena's cottage, refusing to let her out of Ivy's, or his own sight, for more than brief moments. Days passed with no sign of Draven, the tension slowly beginning to ease, until one evening, as Elena walked the short distance from her cottage toward the edge of the settlement to meet Cale, a sudden, sharp movement in the trees sent her heart lurching with alarm. Draven emerged from the shadows, disheveled and wild-eyed, a far cry from the composed, arrogant man who had confronted her weeks before. "You," he snarled, advancing with reckless desperation. "This is your fault. If you had never interfered, none of this would have happened." Elena backed away quickly, fear spiking through her chest, though she forced her voice to remain steady. "Cale won fairly, Draven. You lost. This doesn't have to go any further." "It has to end somehow," Draven growled, closing the distance between them with dangerous speed. "And I intend to make sure it ends on my terms." Before he could reach her, a fierce snarl erupted from the tree line, and Cale burst into the clearing, already shifting mid-stride, ash-colored fur rippling over powerful limbs as he intercepted Draven with explosive force. The two collided violently, rolling across the frost-covered ground in a blur of snapping jaws and desperate strength. Elena scrambled backward, heart pounding, watching in horrified fascination as Cale fought with fierce, protective fury, driven by something far more powerful than the disciplined determination he had shown during their formal challenge. This was not a contest bound by rules and honor. This was raw, desperate defense, and Draven, already weakened and exhausted from days of hiding, quickly found himself overwhelmed. Within minutes, Cale had Draven pinned firmly beneath him, jaws hovering dangerously close to his throat, restrained fury radiating from every line of his powerful frame. Draven went still beneath him, breathing hard, all remaining defiance finally extinguished. Nathan and several other loyal allies arrived moments later, drawn by the commotion, quickly restraining Draven properly this time, ensuring no further opportunity for escape. Cale shifted back into human form, breathing hard, immediately turning toward Elena with fierce, protective concern. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, closing the distance between them, and cupping her face gently in his hands. "I'm fine," Elena assured him, though her voice trembled slightly with lingering adrenaline. "You got here in time." Cale pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, relief and lingering fury warring visibly across his features. "I should have anticipated this," he murmured against her hair. "I'm sorry, Elena. I never should have let my guard down." "You didn't," Elena said firmly, pulling back to meet his eyes. "You protected me, Cale, just like you promised you would." Behind them, Draven was led away under heavy guard, this time toward a more secure confinement that would ensure no further opportunity for escape, his desperate bid for revenge having finally, decisively failed. The council convened swiftly, and given the severity of his actions, Draven's exile from the community was formally decided, a permanent removal that ensured his threat would no longer loom over Cale's leadership or Elena's safety. News of Draven's final defeat spread quickly through the settlement, and with it came a palpable shift in the atmosphere, relief and renewed confidence replacing the lingering unease that had persisted since Cale's initial return. Those who had remained cautious about Elena's presence began, slowly, to soften, recognizing the courage and loyalty she had shown throughout the ordeal. That evening, as the settlement gathered to formally acknowledge the resolution of the conflict, Ruth approached Elena directly, her sharp eyes carrying a warmth Elena had not previously witnessed. "You've proven yourself more than capable of standing beside our leader," the elder said. "Not many humans could withstand what you've faced these past months with such steady courage." "Thank you," Elena said, genuinely touched by the acknowledgement. "This community, and Cale, mean more to me than I expected they would." Ruth's expression softened further. That much is clear to everyone, my dear, perhaps clearer to us than it's been to you. As the gathering continued into the evening, Cale found Elena standing quietly near the edge of the celebration, watching the community he led finally settling into genuine, hard-won peace. He approached her slowly, taking her hand gently in his. It's really over now, he said softly. Truly over. Elena leaned into him, exhaustion and relief, mingling with a deep, quiet happiness she had not expected to find so completely, not after everything that had led them here. Over, she agreed, and whatever comes next, we face it together. Cale pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his arms wrapping securely around her, as the settlement's quiet celebration continued around them, firelight flickering warmly against the surrounding darkness. For the first time since the storm that had first brought them together, the future ahead felt clear of shadows, open and hopeful in ways neither of them had dared to imagine possible. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains that year, melting the last stubborn patches of snow from the shaded hollows, and coaxing new green growth from soil that had spent months buried beneath winter's weight. Elena found herself standing at the edge of the settlement one bright morning, watching the transformation with a quiet sense of wonder, remembering how different this same landscape had looked the night she first found Cale collapsed and dying in the snow. So much had changed since then. The community had settled into a steady, hopeful rhythm under Cale's restored leadership, old divisions slowly mending as trust rebuilt itself through consistent, patient effort. Draven's exile had removed the greatest source of instability, and though scattered pockets of uncertainty still lingered here and there, the overwhelming mood among the hidden people had shifted decisively toward genuine optimism. Elena herself had found an unexpected place within this world, no longer viewed with wary suspicion, but welcomed, gradually, as someone who belonged. She continued her work at the town clinic, splitting her time carefully between the human world she had always known and the hidden community that had become an equally important part of her life. Grace, once skeptical of Cale's mysterious presence, had come to adore him in her own gruff, affectionate way, though Elena had never found the right way to explain the full truth of what he truly was. Some secrets, she had come to understand, were simply not hers alone to share. Cale found her that morning at the settlement's edge, his expression carrying a nervous energy she had rarely witnessed from him, even during the tensest moments of their shared ordeal. "You're up early," Elena observed, studying him curiously as he approached. "I couldn't sleep," Cale admitted, a faint, uncharacteristic flush coloring his cheeks. "I've been thinking about something for quite some time now, and I believe today feels like the right day to finally say it." Elena's heart quickened with curious anticipation. "What is it?" Cale reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own, his golden eyes steady and sincere, despite the nervous energy still evident in his posture. "Elena," he began, "you found me broken and dying in a storm, with no reason to help me, no way of knowing what I truly was, and every reason to walk away and save yourself instead. But you didn't. You gave me your coat, your warmth, your care, without asking for anything in return." "I couldn't just leave you," Elena said softly, throat tightening with emotion. "I know," Cale said, a warm, tender smile touching his lips. "That's exactly who you are, Elena. Kind without condition, brave without hesitation. You've stood beside me through danger you never asked for, earned the respect of people who had every reason to distrust you, and somehow, through all of it, you've made this entire mountain feel like home to me, in a way it never fully did before." Elena's eyes filled with unexpected tears, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show so openly. Cale drew a slow, steadying breath before continuing. "I don't have grand ceremonies or elaborate traditions to offer you," he said. "What I have is simply this: my life, saved because of your courage. My heart, which has belonged to you since long before I fully understood it myself. And my hope, that you might choose to stand beside me, not just through danger, but through everything that comes after it too." He paused, searching her eyes carefully. "Elena, will you stay with me? Not as someone I'm protecting, or someone caught up in circumstances beyond her control, but as my equal, my partner, for as long as you'll have me?" Elena's breath caught, joy and overwhelming love swelling within her chest, as she looked into the eyes of the man she had once found broken and freezing in the snow. never imagining the journey that single act of kindness would eventually lead them both toward. "Yes," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Cale, I choose you. I choose all of this, everything that comes with it." Cale's expression broke into a wide, genuine smile, rare and beautiful, as he pulled her into his arms, holding her close beneath the bright morning sky. Around them, the mountains seemed to hum with quiet renewal, birdsong rising through the clearing air, sunlight breaking warm and golden across the melting snow. Word of their commitment spread quickly through the settlement, met with genuine celebration rather than the wary hesitation Elena might once have expected. Ruth herself oversaw a small, simple ceremony held beneath the towering pines just days later, the entire community gathering to witness the joining of their restored leader, with the woman whose courage and kindness had ultimately saved him, twice over, in ways both large and small. Grace attended as well, invited carefully into a fuller understanding of the truth she had long suspected but never fully confirmed, and though shock colored her expression throughout much of the ceremony, her joy for Elena remained genuine and unwavering. "I always knew there was something special about that man," Grace said afterward, embracing Elena warmly. "I just never imagined how special." Elena laughed, happiness overflowing freely, as she glanced toward Cale, deep in warm conversation nearby, with Nathan and Ivy, his laughter carrying easily across the gathered crowd. "Neither did I," she admitted, "but I wouldn't change a single moment of how we found our way here." As the celebration continued into the evening, firelight flickering warmly against the darkening sky, Elena found herself reflecting on the improbable journey that had led her to this moment. A single act of instinctive kindness, offered to a dying stranger in the middle of a violent storm, had unraveled into a story far larger and more extraordinary than she could ever have imagined, revealing a hidden world, a fierce and enduring love, and a courage within herself she had never fully recognized, until circumstances demanded she summon it. Cale found her later that night, away from the celebration's noise, standing quietly beneath a sky brilliant with stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin gently atop her head as they both gazed upward together. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Elena leaned back against him, warmth and contentment settling deep within her chest. "Not a single one," she said. "You were worth every risk, Cale. Every single one." He turned her gently to face him, pressing a slow, tender kiss to her lips beneath the vast mountain sky, and in that quiet, perfect moment, surrounded by the community they had fought so hard to protect together, Elena finally understood, fully and completely, that the coat she had wrapped around a dying wolf that snowy night had led her not toward danger, but toward exactly the life she had always been meant to find. Together, hand in hand, they turned back toward the warm glow of the settlement's fires, ready to face whatever future awaited them, no longer as strangers bound by chance, but as partners bound by choice, love, and a bond forged through the fiercest storm either of them had ever weathered.